Hey, it's been a minute, but Sabotage is back this week to share an episode from another climate podcast we love called What If We Get It Right? Each week, its host, Dr. Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, and her expert guests explore how we can create a livable future here on Earth. And in this episode, she has a thought-provoking conversation with Ryan Gellert. He's the CEO of Patagonia, where she's also a board member, and they get into a question that feels more relevant than ever. What could happen if corporations do business differently and prioritize protecting the planet as much as earning a profit? You might know Ayana from her New York Times bestselling book, What If We Get It Right? Visions of Climate Futures, which just came out in an updated paperback edition. To celebrate, Ayana is throwing climate dance parties at aquariums, natural history museums, and botanical gardens across the country. If you make it to one, let us know how it is. And until then, you can check out more episodes of What If We Get It Right? They're available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey there, Earthlings, and welcome to What If We Get It Right, a show about climate solutions. This episode is about corporations, consumerism, capitalism, and courage. The context, of course, is that corporations need to dramatically and rapidly reduce their environmental impacts, while instead we have big tech companies abandoning their climate pledges to pursue AI, the Net Zero Banking Alliance disbanding, and a proliferation of both corporate greenwashing and green hushing. Not to mention a U.S. federal government that is dismantling climate regulations, slashing funding for solutions, and refusing to hold corporations accountable. So, where does that leave us? There are some companies out there that are truly trying to do better. I happen to be on the board of one of them, the outdoor company Patagonia. And it was actually because of the first podcast I hosted, How to Save a Planet, that the Chenard family, who owned Patagonia, came across me and my work. I joined the board of directors in 2021 as Patagonia was going through a major transition that resulted in the world having one less billionaire, the founder Yvon Chouinard, and a plan to basically give away all the company's profits to environmental causes in perpetuity. I thought you might like a little peek behind the curtain, so I sat down with the CEO, Ryan Gellert, to dig into the values and practices that have shaped not just Patagonia, but set a high bar across the board for everything from materials and manufacturing to workers' rights and activism to philanthropy. Now, it is not a perfect company, certainly, environmentally or otherwise, but it is a model worth consideration. Now, sometimes in this episode, I ask questions that I already know the answers to, so that Ryan will lay it all out for you. And some things about what happened before I joined the board, I'm hearing for the first time. And the purpose of this conversation is to help us imagine, what if businesses got creative to unleash funding, political influence, and cultural clout to address our environmental challenges? What if corporations were driven not by maximizing quarterly earnings and shareholder profits, but by being good citizens of planet Earth? All right, let's get into it, shall we? Here is my conversation with Patagonia CEO Ryan Gellert. What do you think getting it right looks like for a company that makes stuff, maybe clothing in particular?
I think the vision is that companies, and I'd actually say this goes way beyond outdoor apparel, but companies break the cycle of short-term thinking, break the cycle of short-term investing, and we eliminate this concept of externalities in this sense that, I'm imposing a cost on society, but I can get away with it, therefore I will. I think that's what it really looks like. There's an old saying, there's no business to be done on a dead planet, and I think that's what we're headed towards if we don't take this more seriously.
The thing that we need from
leaders in this moment is people to speak out about what's going on politically. And Patagonia has this strong history of having a really strong voice in defense of nature, public lands, biodiversity, clean air, clean water, etc. And so many of the reasons that things are not protected is political, is policy. How are you thinking about that in this moment, the role of, I guess, corporate communications and the voice of a corporation as an advocate or activist voice?
This moment in time, particularly here in the U.S., is kind of unprecedented. And I think the things that we're all navigating, and it's from educational institutions, academia, it's from the business sector, and it's beyond, they're not just without precedent in my 53 years. They're things I never would have imagined 24 months ago, maybe 12 months ago. Mm-hmm. So that's a starting place. I think the attacks on science, I think the lack of an objective truth that we all sort of center. I'm a big believer that everybody's got a right to their own opinion, but not their own set of facts. I think that whole sentiment has kind of fallen apart.
Yeah.
I think extractive capitalism as government policy seems to be kind of the moment that we're living in. And I believe that a healthy planet with thriving communities relies on a functioning democracy. And I personally feel like that's at risk right now. So how do we navigate this moment? We continue to talk about things that we believe are important if they're facts. If it's science, we're not going to try to describe it some other way. And I think that we try to really stick to issues where we feel like we have some authenticity and we can be additive. And overwhelmingly, I think speaking from the business sector as a business on environmental issues, that's the place where we can be most credible and we can be most additive. So you mentioned public lands. Here in the U.S., I think there's a whole of government attack on public lands. And I think public lands, their establishment, their protection is one of the greatest ideas that America has ever had. And I think it's under incredible threat. I think that one of the things that is easily overlooked and often misunderstood is that in development, whether it's threats to public lands or any other kind of development, you only have to win once. But in conservation, you got to win every day. And so
it's like having to exercise like for the rest of your life.
Imagine if 10% of our public lands were sold off next year. That's 10% that's never coming back. Period.
Right.
And so it's kind of only moving in one direction. And so that's why I think every attempt to curtail the protection of public lands in America is worth fighting for.
Mm-hmm. And that's also something that's typically been nonpartisan in the U.S.
I think it's actually surprisingly nonpartisan even now in a world that's
whoa, our national parks, like,
polarized.
Don't fuck with that. Like, that's the deal. We're going to protect these. They're for all of us.
I think we saw that even through budget reconciliation with Senator Lee from Utah's attempt to sell off public lands at some significant size. We saw people from across the country, across political parties and ideologies basically say back off.
Absolutely not. Yeah. And just the way people reacted to park rangers getting fired.
Right.
We're like, this is what I pay taxes for.
Right.
Like, this is sort of the point.
Right.
This is the contract. So it makes perfect sense that a company like Patagonia would stand up for protecting public land. Maybe is a little more surprising to people that we've done spicy things in the past, like stitch into the clothing tags that say "vote the assholes out," which seems like something we probably wouldn't do right now. So I guess with that kind of as the spectrum, saying like protect our national parks, our public lands, and something so specific and directed. In the last election, it was a campaign that said "vote her" with an earth on it, which some people didn't like because the Democratic candidate was a woman, and they were reading that into it. But at the same time, Patagonia is so known for being like, this is what we stand for.
Let me say this. I think one of the things that people often misunderstand is they think we're some extension of the Democratic Party, and that when Democrats are in office, that we're just queued up trying to figure out ways to support the work they're doing, and when the Republicans are in office, it's the opposite.
Is that really what people think?
Well, I think in this day and age, there is a reductionist thinking of you are either this or this.
Uh-huh.
And we are none of those things.
Yeah.
We have fought with Democratic administrations over environmental issues as long as we have been a business. We have partnered with Republican administrations on environmental issues many times through many administrations. It is difficult, certainly, with this administration to figure out where the opportunities are. So far, 9 or 10 months into it, I haven't found them. But, there's 3+ years left in front of us, and we'll see if that changes. There were many things with the last administration that we fought over, as, again, we have with other Democratic administrations. This is a very different time right now, and the threats that have been made and the threats that have been leveled against individual people and individual companies are really unique in American history. And I'm not oblivious to that. And at the same time, we're going to continue to speak up on the issues, advocate for, and lead from the business sector on the issues that we think we have credibility and the ability to do something about. So that's not going to change.
You've been putting out those op-eds.
Been punching out the op-eds. I suppose that's part of it, speaking at a lot of events.
Yeah.
We've got some stuff in the works right now for the months to come that we're pretty excited about.
Excited to get a preview at the next board meeting here.
We'll see how it lands.
Let's talk about wins, because with 50+ years of history advocating for environmental stuff, what are you most proud of?
The thing that I've been closest to, which means I'm just most emotionally connected to, is protecting rivers in the Balkan Peninsula in Europe. I'll step back and give a little bit of context. I spent 6 years looking after Patagonia's business in Europe, so I was living in Europe. And so we spent some time looking at the rivers and what was the health of the river systems. And what we came to realize was basically every river in Europe was channelized, dammed, otherwise impacted by human hand, with 2 exceptions geographically, Russia and the Balkan Peninsula. And in the Balkans, the good news was what I just said. The bad news was, and this was in probably 2016, there were about 3,000 hydropower projects queued up for those rivers. So that was about to no longer be the case. And so we got involved in supporting a number of local NGOs who were working to protect those rivers. And we've had some impact on that, including the creation of the Vjosa Wild River National Park, which is the first of its kind in all of Europe.
For people who might be surprised to hear that Patagonia is helping to protect a river in Eastern Europe, what is the role that Patagonia actually plays in these nature protection efforts?
It's actually an interesting story. The first time I visited Albania, I don't remember what year, but maybe 2017 or 18, was to spend some time on the Vjosa River and look at that river along with some NGOs that we were partnering with. And we spent a couple of days on the river, camped along the river, floating the river, looking at a hydropower project that they were trying to build. It was sort of partially built, and then they had run into some problems, and so it was stalled out. And then we finished that trip protesting in front of Prime Minister Edi Rama's office in Tirana, the capital city. And I never thought we would get any traction with the Prime Minister on protecting this river. The second visit we made was at the invitation of Prime Minister Rama. I think there was some political pressure from the Albanian people to protect this river. And so he was looking for solutions, so we met. The third visit I made to Albania was to sign a memorandum of understanding between a private company, Patagonia, and the Environmental and Tourist Ministry of Albania. And then the fourth and most recent visit I made was for the declaration of the Vjosa Wild River National Park. I remember actually telling Ivan that I think I was telling him I was on my way to Albania to sign this contract. And he hadn't heard anything about it. And I was just like, oh, yeah, by the way. And he's like, that's great. In classic Ivan fashion.
That sounds good. So the company's mission statement is, we're in business to save our home planet.
That's right.
How do you interpret that? What does that mean to you? Because it's big.
It is big. So in I think it was the early 90s, after wrestling with the question of whether Patagonia should even have a mission statement, Ivan and the team decided to put a mission statement in place, and it was a 3-part mission statement. Build the best product, do no unnecessary harm, and use business to inspire and implement solutions to the environmental crisis. It was in probably 2016, 17 that Ivan started just becoming really adamant that we had outgrown that mission statement and outgrown it in a good way, perhaps because we had made progress against those things, but also in a negative way, which was that the environmental crisis was becoming more profound, more visible, more real. It wasn't just an idea, but it was a reality. And so he felt like we needed to move with a greater sense of urgency, which is why he then kind of forced a change from that mission statement to we're in business to save our home planet.
How do you interpret what that means for your job as CEO, for actually how the company operates in the world?
There's two parts to that simple mission statement that are in tension and both really important. One is we're in business, and the other is to save our home planet. And so are we first and foremost a for-profit business, or are we first and foremost a nonprofit that's focused on doing good in the world environmentally? And I think the reality is we try to kind of have it both ways. We are unapologetically a for-profit business. That's what makes this thing work in the ways that are obvious, which means it's what funds our philanthropy. I think also, and arguably more importantly, in ways that aren't as obvious, which is operating from the business sector. We can be an example of a more responsible business.
That's still profitable, viable.
Still profitable, ascendant. And I think that...
that's a good word.
Thank you. And I think that what that gives us is the ability, unlike an NGO, to sort of say, this is what businesses ought to do. We are an experiment in doing business differently.
My favorite word in the mission statement is the word home, actually, our home planet, because it is a more poetic way to get at the idea that this is it. This is the one and only home that we've got.
Yeah.
So we better get it together here on Earth without being annoying about it.
I think it's a great reminder that regardless of the conversation that happens in parallel about, interplanetary species and so forth, it just is a great reminder that this planet is worth protecting.
When Patagonia made this ownership transition, which we'll talk about, some of the swag that went along with it, there were stickers that said, "Fuck Mars."
Yeah.
And I have one on my ski helmet to this day. And people are like, "Why do you hate Mars so much?" I'm like, it's not that I hate Mars, it's that I really love Earth. So how do you define what success looks like? Because we are not going to single-handedly save Earth.
There's no way in which a single company doing anything is going to have that kind of profound impact. Over the 52, nearly 53-year history of Patagonia, I think the bigger idea than just the money that's been given away or the eco-innovation that we've pioneered and open-sourced or the campaigns that we've run is just consistently providing an example of a business that is more responsible and a healthy business.
Well, let's talk about some of the ways in which Patagonia has tried to live that mission statement, most notably a few years ago, changing the ownership structure of the company. And that came with the simple explanation of that is that Earth is now our only shareholder. And I found out that this was happening when I was already on the board. I was looking through the board prep materials and I was reply all to the board. "What's Chacabuco?" And you were like, "I'll call you."
Yeah, there was. So the origins of this are
a code name. Totally lost on me.
There was a bit of a sort of a skunk works project to answer a question that Yvonne and the Chenard family had asked, which was, let's figure out the future ownership of Patagonia. And so for a long time, what Yvonne had thought about is he had looked at what one of his close friends and mentors, Doug Tompkins, had done with
the North Face.
The North Face, and then Esprit, which is
right.
actually the company where he made a reasonable amount of money with his first wife, and they sold the company. He took his money from that and went down to Chile and Argentina, started buying tracts of land and creating in the process national parks that were donated back to the government of Chile and Argentina. And Yvonne supported that work quite a bit, but always looked at that as kind of a model, which is at some point I'll sell Patagonia and do something similar to that. Difference between Esprit and Patagonia over time was think Yvonne really came to understand that just Patagonia continuing to exist and to be an experiment in doing business differently, and also being an example of a different form of business, actually had really outsized impact, in addition to the resources that it created and the money that it could give away. And so early in 2021, Yvonne asked that we, a small group of us, get together and figure out the future ownership of Patagonia. And we went through this long set of conversations with the Chenard family, just talking about what are all the things that you would want to be true on the other side of this. I think there was a real centering of we want Patagonia to continue to exist in the world, but that it continued to be run imbued with the values that we have given it. And number two was we want to cash flow the environment in much bigger ways, and we want to do that right now. So we had co-founded 1% for the Planet, and our philanthropy as it relates to kind of paying an earth tax goes back to the mid-'80s. And we were giving at that point north of $10 million a year. That was significant.
And the 1% for the Planet that Patagonia instigated is now this global nonprofit with over 4,000 companies that have committed to this 1% of their sales and more than $800 million donated.
Yeah, so that organization was co-founded by Yvonne and Craig Matthews in 2002 after Patagonia donating initially either 10% of profits or 1% of revenue, whichever was greater, ultimately just became 1% of revenue regardless of profitability, and birthed this movement of like-minded companies around the world.
Yeah, everything from chocolate bars to suitcases to T-shirts.
Yeah, that's a pretty diverse group of companies across industries.
But it seems also like the bare minimum.
I think it is as well. And I think even during the years when we were giving 1% prior to the change in ownership, the Chenards were involved in philanthropy much, much larger than just what was coming out through 1% via Patagonia. But coming back to the ownership change, those were the two things. They wanted to give more money away, and they wanted to see Patagonia continue to run according to these values. And so we looked at all the traditional models for business structure. At that time, there were a lot of various riffs on publicly traded companies. You take money from the public markets, and you therefore are beholden to the public markets. We looked at selling within private markets, a minority share, a majority share, complete and control, 100% control. And we looked at ESOPs and otherwise. And in each of those models—
What's an ESOP?
ESOP is, in essence, selling the company to your employees.
Like a cooperative, kind of?
Cooperative is more often associated with your customers own the company, and ESOP is employee-owned, And each of these models kind of had a fatal flaw or more than one relative to those two goals that the Chenards were pursuing.
I think it's obvious probably to people why the selling the company or part of it could have these significant downsides vis-a-vis the mission statement, but maybe say a bit more about why the employee-owned version.
Yeah, there were two things about that were big concerns. Well, actually, three. One was there was not a way to make that equally accessible to our global employees. So that is a structure that can work pretty well for a
US
business
company
that is based solely in the U.S. That's not our footprint at all. We're a very global business, and a significant number of our employees based outside the U.S.
I'm asking this question naively. People would be like, aren't you supposed to know this? You're on the board. But this conversation happened before, right before I was looped in.
Yeah. The other two pieces on ESOP, just to finish that out, there is a sale at whatever price you agree to, but there's a sale, and that with employees would almost certainly mean a bunch of debt that the employees take on, or it fails the test of being able to cash flow the environment. So there was something there that had to give. And then finally, the third piece had long been a concern about if our employees' careers were tied up in Patagonia and their retirements were solely tied up in Patagonia, and equity, their ownership of the company, was also all in Patagonia. How would we ensure that the company continued to take bold positions and also think long-term in the decisions that it made when it was owned by the employees? And I think that was, candidly, a pretty legitimate concern.
Yeah, and that continues to be a question just in general for Patagonia, but also for every company right now when we're thinking about how much to speak up in this political environment. So this is going to be a topic we discuss in the board meeting, is like, how does a company adhere to its values and use its voice in a moment where there could be some really serious repercussions?
Yeah, I would say that these are unprecedented times on that topic.
Yeah. So there was this desire to change the way the company was structured in order to give more money away to environmental causes. Where did that land? I obviously know the answer to this question, but tell the listeners who don't already know the story.
Yeah, as I was saying before, we looked at kind of all the traditional models, didn't find one that worked, and so basically took parts off the shelf and put them together in a fairly novel way. It's as complicated a topic as you make it, but the simple version is this. There are two entities on the other side of this transaction. One is the Patagonia Purpose Trust, and it's a trust whose purpose is to ensure that Patagonia continues to run according to its values. And the Patagonia Purpose Trust has all of the voting shares of Patagonia, so it has the control pieces, has 2% of the financial value of Patagonia. The other entity on the other side of this is the Holdfast Collective, a series of 501c4s that have 98% of the financial value of Patagonia, and they don't have the voting shares. And so that's, in essence, the model. How it actually works is we run the business as a for-profit business every year.
And that's what I'm on the board of, is the corporation.
You're on the board of the corporation that oversees the business. And we report to the Patagonia Purpose Trust that sits above us all. And they basically hire and fire board members. And the board keeps an eye on the business. And at the end of each year, the profits that we make, we look at, okay, how much do we need to set aside for a rainy day, if any?
There's a really exciting finance committee meeting where we get into the nitty-gritty of like how much we reinvest in the company versus give away.
That's right. So how much do we set aside for a rainy day to ensure our independence? How much do we reinvest in the business? And everything else we dividend over to the Holdfast Collective.
And so Earth is our only shareholder, like truly means there are no individual private owners that receive like dividends or anything like that. All of the money goes to
That's correct.
Environmental stuff.
We've got really unique founders who are really committed to these ideas. And
that really shocked me in a good way when I was in my first board meeting because, you know, as someone who had, of course, been familiar with this company for most of my life. I mean, I remember like buying my first Patagonia jacket to go on my first big backpacking trip when I was like 14, which I promptly like lost in an airport. And my mom was like, these are things we cannot afford to lose. I ought to get it together. But you see the magazine, the journal, and I remember the first one I saw had all this information about monarch butterfly migration being at risk. And I was like, this all seems a bit too good to be true. But joining the board and seeing in those early meetings that I was in, the sense that it really was a question of like, how do we do the best possible thing for the planet? Not like, should we, how good should we try to be? And it's interesting to me that even if everyone on the board is on the same page, like we need to do the best possible thing for the planet, for our people that we can do, it's still really hard. Because it's like a global business with a global supply chain that we don't have full control over in different ways.
Yeah, it is. I think the situation here for Patagonia was unique. It's funny because people often use that as an excuse of, like, they almost treat it like
it's
the Chenards
so
backed into
like
it.
Unreplicable.
Well, they didn't take outside money. They held on to it. So that's a compliment or a credit to them, not the opposite. And so it's a very disciplined way of building a business over 50 years.
Yeah.
But that said, I think that it's a convenient excuse for many, including publicly traded companies, that you can't do more, that you can't think longer term. I refuse to accept this Friedman ideology that the number one role of a company is, or corporation, is to maximize shareholder wealth. And that therefore means you got to report on quarterly basis and you got to think short term and you should be maximizing how much money you kick out via dividend or stock appreciation to the owners of the company. It's just a fallacy. And
I remember when the ownership structure changed and I remember Yvonne saying, now there's one less billionaire in the world.
Yeah.
Like gleefully.
Yeah.
I'm not on the Forbes list anymore, thank God.
Yeah.
Which is not a thing you normally hear people say. And I was like, oh, this is a totally different ballgame.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't want people to hear this conversation and be like, it's the CEO and a board member talking about how great this company is.
Yeah.
Obviously, we believe that's why we're here. But I do want to get into like some of the nitty gritty, I guess. And one of the things is within this shift in ownership to Earth being the shareholder, there's a question of like, what does that mean for the employees who are like, okay, so you're just going to give away like $50 or $100 million a year. And I know you think a lot about how that ripples through the vibe in the company and people who might be like, well, I could use a raise, or why aren't we doing different things on benefits? How do you balance that? Like, we want to maximize how much we're able to fund environmental causes versus taking good care of the people who work here, which has always been such a priority in terms of like on-site childcare or the healthcare benefits or the let my people go surfing sort of ethos for having people work here who are also adventurers.
Yeah, I would say, first of all, you laid it out as how do you balance maximizing, like giving away as much money as possible with our people. So I would say the first part of the answer is totally in reverse order of that. If we run our business well, if customers appreciate the product that we make and the service that we provide, and we run this business with discipline, it should be a profitable business. And we ask ourselves two things at the end of the year. How much of that money do we reinvest back in the business? And what's left? And what do we do with that money? We dividend it over to Holdfast. And how do they put that money to work? And so that's the order that those two things happen in. And there is an obsession with making sure that we are reinvesting back into Patagonia, including in support of our employees in a way that's responsible and right.
And even as like healthcare costs are going through the roof.
Our healthcare costs here in the U.S. have doubled in the last 4 years. And so that's a fact. And the tariff bill that we've inherited this year, unplanned and unforeseen, is, let's see, this year it'll be $35 million. Next year it'll be probably 13 more than that.
Yeah.
Yes, when you annualize it over a full year. This is the business landscape. We are one of a handful of companies, I couldn't tell you how many here in the U.S., but the health insurance that we offer to our employees, it's the same policy. The same policy that I have is the same policy that a frontline employee has and everybody in between. So we don't differentiate based on seniority or tenure or anything else. Number two, we pay our employees for their own health care, don't pay anything out of pocket from their paycheck. So we cover all of that. We're not the only company in America that does that, but we're one of a handful that do it.
Yeah.
And even in an environment where the healthcare costs have been going up like I described, that's something that we think is foundationally important. Our childcare costs have gone up about at the same pace healthcare has, and that's really difficult for us to figure out how to offset those costs, but also provide accessibility for our employees to on-site childcare. It's also tricky because not all of our employees either have kids or have kids of that age group. And so, like, how do you create benefits that sort of do the best for the most when you recognize that they're not of equal value to everybody? So there's a lot there that we figure out. I think the big broad answer I'd give you to your question is, I guess, a few things. One is imperfectly. This is just the job is constantly trying to figure out how to make this work. And the other piece is really the order in which we consider all this. We need to run the business as responsibly as we can. We need to reinvest in the business. Our people are a huge piece of all of that. And then at the end, we grant the money that we do. I think one of the things that we learned through, 40 years of granting via 1% for the planet, is that our employees really love to be involved in that, and they really want to understand where that money is going, to feel kind of an emotional connection to it. I think one of the growing pains with this new model and the Holdfast piece is how do we create an environment where they feel as invested in where this money is going and the impact that it's driving as they have been able to with 1%. What's different between 1% grants and Holdfast is a lot of the Holdfast money goes towards large-scale land acquisition, and that's not something that you can talk about quite as openly until the deals are done.
Right.
I truly believe that sitting next to the amount of money that Patagonia has given away eco-innovation that we've pioneered, from natural rubber wetsuits to turning plastic bottles into fleece and a million other
Getting
things
PFAS
along the
out
way.
of raincoats
Right,
and
all
that.
of it. I still think modeling a more responsible form of business from the business sector for 53 years and counting I think it's a bigger impact.
And that only works if people follow the example.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's a great body of work that shows that it's had an impact. I think the number of organizations that we've co-founded.
The Regenerative Organic Alliance.
Regenerative Organic Alliance, what was called the Sustainable Apparel Coalitions, changed names, the Outdoor Industry Association.
1% for the Planet.
1% for the Planet, Fair Labor Association.
Some good ripples in the world.
Yeah. I think it makes a difference.
And I think the other thing I didn't anticipate when I joined the board was just how deeply rooted the discomfort was with selling stuff and being part of consumer culture and capitalism.
Right.
And it's funny to be in a corporate board meeting and people being like, well, how much stuff do we really need to sell? And how much do we really want to grow the company versus just stay smaller?
Yeah.
So maybe we can get into that a little bit, sort of how to reconcile this distaste for consumerism with the fact that we literally sell stuff to people. It's how do we think about growth?
I think all speed is relative. And so the notion that growth is either good or bad, I think, is a flawed sort of way of thinking about it. I think growth is compared to what? So are we growing compared to last year? Okay, that's one way of looking at it. Are we growing compared to the market? Are we growing compared to the customer interest and demand? And so what we really center is not trying to create artificial demand. I don't think it's the idea of growth that concerns me. I think it's the idea of growth for growth's sake. I think that's pretty much the ideology of a cancer cell and not much else. It's not lost on me. It's not lost on us that while we invest significantly in making the best product that we can, performance-wise, footprint-wise, and quality-wise, the vast majority of the product that we sell is to people who want this product but don't need it to survive. That's the reality. And so I think the question is, as a company that, for whom that is true and has a purpose statement of we're in business to save our home planet, how do you square that circle?
Exactly.
And I think the answer is we obsess about how we engineer quality into everything we do. We obsess about how we not just minimize the footprint of the product that we create, the business that we run, but where can we get scale across our competitors, across the industry, and beyond? Where can we truly change the system within which we operate? How can we use our voice? And how can we use our money? And how can we use our convening power to try to create the kind of world that we want to live in? And that's the sort of whole of business approach that we take to this. I'll make a little bit of a plug for this new report that we've got coming out.
Yeah,
I think it'll be out by the time this podcast drops. But it's called our Work in Progress Report. And it's the first time we've done this. I think we're pretty well known as good storytellers around just different things that we believe and different things that we're doing. But one of the things we've never done is do a full whole of business. How do we think about these things from growth to different elements of footprint, carbon footprint, use of chemicals, end-of-life solutions, and kind of pull together how we think about things, what we have been working on, where we have had some success, where we've had small or large failures, where we were idealistic about something we could accomplish, and where we've come up way short of the mark, in what we're doing next in the work we're doing. And so we've got a report that we've been working on a bunch this year, and it's our best attempt to do that. And
we'll put the link in the show notes. People can check it out.
Perfect. Unlike traditional CSR reports, it is not just data dependent so that it is scientifically rigorous, but probably read by 3 people. But it's also not full narrative form where it's the opposite, super accessible and doesn't say anything. We tried to balance those 2 things. And I'd be really interested in hearing how we did.
Yeah. And always the good graphic design, which I appreciate.
It's a beautiful report.
Yeah. So you mentioned the environmental footprint, and one of the things that's the hardest is, as a company that makes stuff, but doesn't own the factories, there are limits to how much you can directly control versus influence.
Right.
So I think it would be helpful to share a little bit about how you work to reduce the environmental footprint when our manufacturing is a small part of a particular factory, say in Southeast Asia, and they're working with a grid that maybe has machines that are run with coal or oil, and there may be like national policies and politics that determine the context within which those factories are operating and what sustainability practices they may or may not adopt. But we put that on our balance sheet as part of our footprint, even though we can't fully control it. So how does Patagonia try to use its influence to make those changes, even when we can't just decree it, even if we're willing to say, like, take the loss? That doesn't mean we get to just tell other people what to do.
Let me give you an example of something that we have been at for a long time, about a decade now, and I don't think it's getting anywhere near the traction that it ought to. I would hope that some of the listeners to your podcast put pressure on some of the brands that they buy product from to change that. But it's this fair trade certification.
I was just going to ask you about that. The workers part of this.
Yeah,
too.
So we've been working with Fair Trade USA. We basically partnered with them to move from agriculture, primarily coffee, into apparel. And we have been partnering with them for a decade in doing that. And the simple version of how that works is there's a couple of things that need to happen. Number one, a factory needs to become Fair Trade USA certified. So that's a one-time body of work and then ongoing auditing. And there's a cost and a complexity with that. For all of the partners that we work with, we work with the supplier and we take care of all that. That's all in place. Once it's done, the entire facility is Fair Trade USA certified. Then what any customer of the factory can choose to do is pay fair trade premiums. And those premiums, so if you're buying your items, you're buying your production, you send the money to the factory. The fair trade premiums are on behalf of the people who make the product, and that is a secondary payment. And councils of employees come together and decide how they want to use that money.
Oh, I'd forgotten that part.
And so
that's actually the best part.
The only thing that an apparel company working in any of these factories has to commit to doing, there is no startup cost, there is no startup complexity. They just have to say, we want to participate in this, and we commit to paying that fair trade premium. And if you look around the apparel industry, very few companies have made that commitment. Actually, one of the companies who had been in this program for about a decade in the outdoor space just this past year quit because it costs money. And, you know, in a world where people are looking at where can they pull cost out of their business.
That's whack.
This is one of the places that they go. And in strictly accounting terms, whack.
To move backwards on human rights.
Yeah, and I'm not going to name the company, but I hate the fact that they're trying to do that quietly. So that's an example where it doesn't work. Look, one of my favorite quotes, because I think there's just so much truth to it, is the reward for solving a problem is often an invitation to a bigger problem. And so when we're talking about problems in our supply chain and things that we want to be true, I don't think there's any bigger problem that we're looking at today than decarbonization. And so I think to the question about, you know, we own none of our factories, we own none of our mills. 93% of our carbon footprint is in the product that we make. And
doesn't matter how perfect your stores are or your headquarters offices.
No, putting solar panels on all of our facilities is a rounding error in the scheme of things. And so the big opportunity, the big need is decarbonization at the mill level. And again, we don't own any of these mills. They're largely on the other side of the planet. We're a small part of the throughput of each of them. And driving change from whatever the current energy source is, and some of them are still on-site burning of coal. Some of them are natural gas.
I actually remember in a board meeting seeing a photograph of just the huge warehouse full of coal at the beginning of every day and empty at the end of every day.
That's
just
right.
like rail cars worth of coal coming in because like the boilers used in the fabric process required that kind of like high energy intensity heat. And there's obviously other ways to do it, but like not available and more
coal's the
expensive.
cheapest.
Yeah.
So instead of pretending that this is not our responsibility and our problem to solve, we have wrestled with, so what do we do about it? And we have been engaged for a couple of years now with 4 of our supplier partners, all of which are located in Asia, Taiwan, Vietnam, and trying to figure out what is the source of their energy, why, what are the constraints and complexities, what's the availability of renewable energy, electrified renewable energy, and what's the efficiency of how they use the on-site energy. And so we have been partnering with them to try to understand that, doing engineering studies to figure out what the solutions look like, and then putting money behind ultimately creating. We're really opposed to leaning on carbon offsets to get to net zero.
Do we have any?
We don't.
Yeah,
and so what we're looking at is developing a scheme for carbon insetting in our supply chain.
Scheme sounds like it's bad, but it's actually just like
this is
a
the
plan.
This is the good kind of scheme. We're trying to create a model for carbon insetting so that there is a measurable, tangible reduction in the creation of greenhouse gas emissions at the mill level for the product that we make.
Mm-hmm. So what strikes me hearing you talk about this actually is just the long-term investment that it takes to do some of this stuff in ways that are more environmentally friendly, whether that's materials or manufacturing. These are like decadal scale projects, if not longer, to figure out these better ways of doing things. And this stuff is just like going on behind the scenes for years and years and years before it's like, surprise, we did a thing.
Yeah.
And this is actually one of my critiques of corporate, like environmental communications broadly, is that we only hear often about the work when there's a moment to declare victory, do a press release. We're the environmental hero versus telling the story and bringing people along with you on the trial and error drama of it all. How do you think about that?
I mean, that's a big part of the reason that we wanted to do this work in progress report. What we have always been really uncomfortable with is talking about what our ambitions are and saying, look, by this date, we commit to this. I just feel like the world is full of those sort of open-ended, kind of hollow commitments. I think we've always just been really reluctant to make them.
They don't have to be hollow if you have like a roadmap to
Well,
get
and
there.
I think on greenhouse gas emissions, I think it's probably the first topic where we feel like there's just no choice but to make longer-term commitments because there's no short-term solutions to these things. And so I think that—
Oh, I see. When other companies are making these announcements, it's like not ambitious
I
enough.
think up until we started really talking about greenhouse gas emissions, I think the topics generally were things that could be impacted in much shorter timescales.
Like just fix it.
Well, yeah. So transition to organic cotton, that's a decision that you can make. When Yvonne made the commitment on behalf of Patagonia in the mid-90s to convert, I think gave the company 18 months to convert from conventional cotton to 100% organic cotton. Regenerative organic cotton is different. That's probably best done permanently at small scale. And so the solution at larger scale is cooperatives of small-scale farmers. So I think that one's a little bit different. That's a really high bar standard for cotton. I think it's the right standard, but it's an ambitious standard.
Yep. So another part of this question about sustainability and this tension with like wanting to be in business to save our home planet while making stuff is just like, well, how many things should we be making?
Yeah.
Right. And this is a question that this is something I've pushed on as a board member is how many kinds of jackets, how many items do we need to be making? Because by the sort of, it can feel like an endless scroll on a website to see like, oh my gosh, there's so many things. Are they saying all of these are important things to have? Like how does that visual of just the sheer number of things we're selling vibe with the like, don't buy this jacket, full-page ad in the New York Times that's like, just keep wearing the one you have. We'll repair it for you. So I'm curious how you think about squaring that. And certainly I've been glad to see just like the number of items has decreased 10 or 20% just over the 5 years I've been here.
Yeah, we have a lot of styles. We've actually been really focused on reducing the number of styles that we offer and increasing the productivity of the styles that we have. I think one of the really challenging realities of Patagonia is, we kind of want it both ways. We have pushed really hard and invested a lot in our resale business. So if you've got Patagonia
let's talk
products—
about worn wear.
Well, I think the goal for worn wear resale is that it should be as easy to buy secondhand from Patagonia as it is to buy new. I mean, I think that's the simple goal.
And easy to give it back,
And
too.
is easy to sell
send
it back as
your
well,
stuff
absolutely.
Or drop it off
Yeah.
at the store
Yeah.
and get
Yeah.
a credit for it.
We put a lot of money behind this. We've really tried to disrupt the shopping path for our customers. If they're looking for a brand new black medium nano puff jacket and we've got a used one, we'll make it visible to them that there's a used option available. The number of people I talk to are like, oh God, you used to make this product like 10 years ago and I love this thing and it's no longer in the line. So I keep an eye on wornwear. The second one pops up, I'm going to jump on it. Sometimes we get bored of things a lot faster than our customers do. One of the pieces that we brought in-house from out-of-house most recently is the ability to sell us back product via e-com. We've got a simple test, a quiz on the website that tells you these are the variables that we consider, and so here's the expected value of the product, and here's the process for sending it back to us. Anytime you visit Patagonia, we'll show you some things that are new. You have something you want to repair, we'll help you out with that. You have something you want to sell back, we'll help you out with that. You want to buy a secondhand instead of new, we'll help you out with that as well. And if you want to do 3 or 4 of those things at once, that's fantastic. Let's help you do that. If you're interested in getting involved on an environmental topic in your community, we'll serve up ways that you can do that as well.
Yeah, the activism pieces.
Through Patagonia Action Works.
And I think the cool thing about Action Works is actually the way it's structured around skills-based volunteering. And this is something I talk about a lot with, say, like the climate Venn diagram, that I encourage people to think about how their particular skills can be applied to helping to address a particular environmental challenge in a way that they find, hopefully, delightful.
Yeah, I mean, if you're great at designing logos and, clean water is an issue or free-flowing rivers is an issue of great importance to you, there's probably an organization out there that would benefit from your skill set.
Or an event planner or a project manager, an accountant, like all these kinds of different skills that people are, that vetted nonprofits in Action Work are like, is there someone who wants to help us with this thing?
Absolutely.
So it's
that's
like
the big idea.
Matchmaking service there. But let's get back to wornwear for a second, because it's been a big investment to do that full integration with the new product, the warehousing, the you have to look
customer
at the quality
service.
of it all. Yeah, the customer service. It's a kind of a pain in the butt logistically. Is it worth it in terms of, I mean, it's the right thing to do, but does it make sense financially?
Yeah, it does. It's a fast-growing piece of business. It's profitable. And I think it's a piece of business that can scale. I mean, people often ask, what does success look like with this? I think it's too new for me to super confidently put a number and say it should be X percentage of our business. I would tell you if it was 10% of our business, it would really be, it'd be significant.
What is it now? Do you know?
It's about 1 point.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's about $15 million in annual business right now. I think one of the things that is a perpetual challenge with that is the supply and demand piece.
Yeah.
When we put a priority on
Everybody
getting supply.
take the stuff out of the back of your closets that you're never going to wear again. Bring it in.
Well, I think maybe a slightly different riff on that is you think you need a new jacket. Just what jacket is this intended to replace? And what are you doing with that jacket? And give it away to somebody that'll use it. Sell it back to us. Donate it. But do something constructive with it.
Keep it in use.
The most sustainable product is product that already exists.
Yeah.
So I think this is really an attempt to help people live within that. I said it's a profitable piece of business. This is a tough way to make money just on its own. There's easier ways to make money. But I think it's part of this ecosystem and relationship that we have with our customer and community. So I think it's foundationally important. And we have figured out how to do it profitably.
Okay. If you had to pack a survival kit for the next 50 years of corporate environmental climate action, what 3 things would you put in there?
Pack some boldness, pack some bigger thinking, and pack some commitment to coalition building. And then pack some warm weather gear, because the next 50 years are probably going to be a lot warmer than the last 50 were.
Yeah, we're shifting what we make because of it. I feel like this is a moment that calls for a lot of courage. And I'm wondering how you see all the other CEOs that you are interacting with. Are you seeing enough courage?
There is not enough courage, full stop, to meet the moment that we're in right now. I think that's inarguable. I think that's different than me sitting here and kind of taking shots at the leaders of every other business. But I'll tell you this, I went to Climate Week in New York, I don't know, 6 weeks ago or so. And I remember thinking clearly on the flight to New York, I was like, God, I don't know what to expect in this environment. And I don't know if there'll just be no energy. I just don't know what to expect.
September 2025. What's going to be the vibe at Climate Week?
And I will tell you this, it was as much determination, if not more, than I'm used to seeing. And so, I think the group is getting smaller. I think you're starting to see kind of who's really in it and who's really committed and who's in it for the right reasons, because you wouldn't still be sticking with this right now and doing the hard work within your business and standing up and offering a point of view that's counter to the current cultural and political narrative if you weren't committed to this. And so I do think that there are leaders in businesses across a number of industries who fit that description. And I appreciate tremendously being in relationship with them and being in community with them. There aren't enough. And even any of us that feel like we're doing that at all, it's not enough. This is the moment where we've got to stand up and be counted, not for ourselves, not for our shareholders, in many ways, not even entirely for our employees, but for future generations.
Are you seeing that there's like a commitment to making progress on decarbonizing or sticking to the plans that these companies have already set out, but being quieter about it, the sort of climate hushing thing?
Yeah, I think there's a fair bit of that,
And I guess my question is, if corporations are doing the right thing secretly, privately, how much does that slow down the momentum of bringing other companies along and raising the bar?
Look, businesses and the leaders of businesses are pretty much lemmings. It's when a bunch are moving in one direction and it's working, others pile in and move in the same direction. That's the reality of it. And so I think if this is happening quietly, to your point, I think it has a profound impact. It has a real cooling effect on how much momentum we build. And so I think it beats the alternative of the progress not happening, but I think it's terrible.
There's reporting just this week on how Democratic politicians have really cut back on how much they're talking about climate.
Yeah.
So it's not just the business sector. This is happening.
Well, look at academia
the board.
and look at topics that go well beyond just climate in academia. There's pretty brilliant branding from a certain side of the narrative around if all of a sudden it's a bad thing. If you care about people, you care about the planet, you're branded woke, and that's a bad thing. And it's a bit ridiculous.
I mentioned before that Patagonia in 2020 had sewed these tags into some clothing that said, "Vote the assholes out." If you could sew into every Fortune 500 CEO's jacket one pithy quote of advice about the environmental part of doing business, what would it say?
You're asking me to come up with something.
I know you're not like the head of marketing.
Is more true than vote the assholes out on the fly, but just something that reminds people to do the right thing every day and think beyond the end of your nose, and how you're thinking about running the business and who ultimately you're doing it for. I just think getting corporate America to think longer term about the decisions that they make is what's absolutely needed.
This doesn't really capture maybe the long-term piece of it, but listening to you say that reminds me of something that I've been thinking about a lot, which is be a good citizen of planet Earth.
Yeah.
Like, what does that mean?
Yeah.
Like, how would you live? And the other thing I've been thinking and saying a lot is act as if you love the future.
Yeah.
Maybe that captures more of the long-term.
I think it does. And one of the things that I think about a lot
we may need 2 tags for them.
We're going to need a bunch. We're going to need a full hang tag. I think the thing that you reminded me of with the citizen thing is the most important title in society is not president, it's not CEO, it's citizen. And I really believe that's true. And I think one of my biggest concerns is that people are sort of being trained to de-emphasize the importance of that. And I think you're seeing it in attacks on voting. I think you're seeing it in attacks on agency, this sense that we don't have control over our future, which I think is total bullshit. And I think that's a myth that we got to break before it gets too much traction.
What is the most boring, least sexy thing we need to do to get from where we are now to companies really playing the best possible role in this journey towards climate environmental solutions?
If you want something that's really unsexy, it's probably decarbonization. It's just invisible in every definable way.
Yeah.
Literally.
Scope 3.
Yeah, it's a foundationally important and super unsexy topic.
Is there like a piece of that in particular that you're like, this is the thing we need to unlock?
Boy, that's a tough one to answer right now with all this conversation around AI and tech companies who were making really big, bold commitments 3 years ago now, just walking them all back saying the energy usage for AI is going to be so significant and the need to win the AI arms race is an existential threat. So, I mean, I wish we could roll back to 3 years ago when things only seemed really bad. So I don't know. I can tie myself up in knots on this one.
What are 3 things you wish everyone knew about climate solutions?
That they're achievable, that you've got more influence and opportunity to impact outcomes than you probably realize. And I think there are many ways to engage, and I think you're a perfect example of this. So often in your speaking, in your writing, and in this podcast, there's ways to engage in this work and with joy. And I don't think it all has to be doom and gloom.
I actually think that's something we didn't talk about when we're talking about Patagonia's voice in the world, is how like irreverent and funny it can be. And I remember actually going through the latest board meeting materials, seeing that the comms team was like, we're planning on leaning into the humor of it all. And I was like, thank God. Because I feel like in this moment that is so serious, one of the most effective ways to call out the ridiculousness is to just make fun of it and just have this sense of like, on the one hand, are you fucking kidding me? And on the other hand, we can take climate seriously and not take ourselves seriously.
Yeah. I think we've got a great history of that irreverence that you described. And I think satire right now to meet the moment is like it's the sweet spot, whether it's The Onion or South Park or Jon Stewart or so many others. I think they do that brilliantly. And so,
I would say the environmental movement hasn't historically been awesome at that.
The environmental movement hasn't historically been very funny.
No, it's too bad.
That's not exactly a hot take.
That's the hottest take I've got, Ryan. Don't take that away from me. What song best represents the vibe that you bring to climate work?
It's going to be such an esoteric one for this group.
This is perfect.
But one of my favorite artists is Dinosaur Jr. And one of my favorite.
Heard of this. Is this a person? Is this a band?
It's a bit of both.
Okay.
It's one guy with a band. One of the songs I love is called Keep Chopping. Yeah, that sort of gets right to the heart of just keep doing the work, just keep showing up.
In my anti-apocalypse mixtape, one category of the songs on there is tunes for tenacity. And I feel like this might fit into that
this
category.
Would add it to your list.
What's your call to action for us, for everybody listening? What would you have us do in order to help realize this better version, this getting it right version for corporations in climate solutions?
Remember the power that you have. Like to bastardize Winston Churchill's quote about Americans, where he said you can always count on Americans to do the right thing once they've exhausted every other option. And I think the same is true with CEOs.
Wow.
And I think that business leaders, business owners, CEOs, I think that they talk a good game, and then the reality is they do whatever is in their short-term interest. But if the winds are blowing in the direction of themes of sustainability, they talk that game.
Yeah.
I think for this audience and for most people out there, not forgetting the influence and the power that you have as a customer, as an employee, and as a citizen. And I think really remembering how much power exists within those different roles and putting it to bear. That's the call to action.
And that was my conversation with Patagonia CEO Ryan Gellert. Lots of food for thought for me, hopefully for you as well. I'll share links to what we talked about in the show notes, including that new work in progress report that Ryan mentioned. And you'll find more in the Substack newsletter. That's at ayanaelizabeth.substack.com if you aren't subscribed already. Let me know what you think of this conversation in the comments over there. This podcast is ad-free thanks to the support of Future Being, a grant-making and special project studio which supports the healing of our planet and the safeguarding of biological and cultural diversity. Special thank you to Ryan's executive assistant, Mary Martin, who set up this conversation. Congratulations, Mary, on your retirement. Thank you to Dave Gertzman, who engineered the recording for us at Patagonia headquarters. This episode was produced by Ramoy Phillip and me, Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, with support from assistant producer Janisha Shrestha. Okay, Earthlings, that's it for now. See you next week.